Shamash. That's going to be the extent of my Polish today. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm from Singularity University in Silicon Valley, located inside NASA Research Park, and I'm here to share some of the technologies and developments that we see providing huge new waves of entrepreneurship. We saw entrepreneurs in computer hardware, computer software, internet, mobile. Each one of those waves created billionaires and increased the quality of life for people across the world. And there's even bigger waves coming. They're very exciting. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I just sold a company to Airbnb recently. Even when I wasn't, I had startups on the side. I was fortunate enough to work with Richard Branson for 5 years, which was a wonderful experience. And after all that, I can say that there is no more exciting time to be an entrepreneur than right now. And I'm going to share some of the reasons why. The explosion that's happening in startups, and if you can't feel it, just get online and you can read about it and see the numbers. But all over the world, it's happening. I traveled to Siberia, and I sat down with entrepreneurs who were very, very savvy, up to speed. They had adopted all of the best practices from the internet, and you're seeing that more and more, which you would not have seen 10 years ago. Why? So some of the reasons that are driving the explosion are just a better understanding of how to mitigate risk in a startup. It's events like this where you're going to learn and hear from people. The transfer of people and ideas from around the world is more fluid. There's better information for free online than you could ever get as an entrepreneur in the past. We were fumbling around in the dark and bumping our heads up against the wall. If you do have a startup or you're an aspiring entrepreneur, and if you already don't know about the works of Eric Ries and Steve Blank and others, I urge you to go out and grab those and read them. And it's not just the knowledge, but it's the tools. Entrepreneurs have created cheaper tools for other entrepreneurs, whether it's hiring or managing your expenses or legal. All of those things are driving down the hurdles and the barriers to doing a startup, and the risk. Those are just a few companies that can help you as you get started. There's many more. Crowdfunding is an incredibly powerful tool that has a potential to address one of the biggest challenges, which is a lack of a venture capital ecosystem. And it's very, very early right now, but it has a lot of potential, and we're already starting to see it have an impact in product-based companies that traditionally have found it difficult to attract venture capital. So that holds promise for regions around the world who also lack that VC ecosystem. But even though all those things are driving an explosion in startups, there's something even more fundamental underneath that is driving this explosion, and that is the law of accelerating returns in technology. And what you see here is a chart out of Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, on which Singularity University was founded. And one of the major tenets is an understanding and an insight that Ray had after tracking technology performance all the way back to 1900. The orange column that you see on the right is the price performance or the computing power that you get for $1 per second, computations per second per dollar spent. And you can see it increasing. This is on a logarithmic plot. And people have generally widely known that as Moore's Law, which Gordon Moore from Intel named, specifically that every 18 months, the cost of the same performance of a chip would get cut in half. It's pretty widely known. What people don't know is that that same trend had been occurring before the chip was ever invented. And if you track back to transistors and vacuum tubes and relays and even punch cards, and you put those together, each of those technologies forms an S-curve where it flattens out in terms of its growth of performance. But another S-curve comes along, another technology is created that picks it up. And together, they form a very smooth curve that shows an increasing price performance of computing. Now, there's a couple of things interesting about this chart. First is it's curved. and it's on a logarithmic scale, which means that the rate at which the technology is increasing is itself increasing. And the second important thing to note is that throughout wars and depressions and anything else you can see from 1900, the curve is remarkably consistent and reliable. Nothing has been able to shake the progression of technology. And when you see certain governments try to restrict certain types of research, it just moves to another place in the world. That happened with stem cells in the US. Went outside and progress continued and the curve continued. That's what Ray identified as the law of accelerating returns, and it applies much more broadly to all kinds of technologies, storage, mobile, and many other things. In fact, you can look at the history of technology and zoom out all the way back to the beginning of humanity, to the agricultural revolution 9,000 years ago. And if you look along this chart, you can see large gaps. The bottom axis, the x-axis, is time in years. So between pottery being invented and the plow and irrigation and mathematics, you see big chunks of time as humanity developed. The y-axis is population. And something interesting happens around 1500 where that curve takes off. That's about the Renaissance or the invention of the printing press. And population starts to take off. Now note, it's actually before the second agricultural revolution. Population skyrockets, and we're seeing that today, but more importantly, there are massively significant, groundbreaking technological advancements that occur closer and closer together on that chart. So from airplanes and telephones and high-speed computers and the internet and going to the moon, relative to the gap between the kind of innovation historically, it's getting shorter. And even in your own lifetime, we can see the time to adoption for certain internet technologies versus Facebook or mobile or other things. It's getting shorter and shorter. And 3 billion people are about to come online across the world that have not had access to mobile phones over the next 5 years or so, which will even further increase that. I won't go into this too much, but if you're not familiar with Hans Rosling's work, he does a great job of highlighting how different countries around the world have increased their life expectancy and income per person from 1900, and there's a really nice time series visualization of these bubbles that's going around the internet for some time if you haven't seen it. Some of the statistics by which we've been able to increase the quality of life on Earth for humans is pretty extraordinary, and it's driven by that technology. It allows us to feed more people and improve healthcare and medicine and everything else. That's backward looking. Let's look forward. We've shrunk that chart into the bottom left there, and you can kind of see where the orange stops at about 2010. And right now, this chart shows the calculations per second for a $1,000 laptop. So most people's laptop has the equivalent computing power of about an insect brain today. And within 5 years, it'll have the computing power of about a mouse brain. In about 10 years, that same $1,000 laptop will have the computing power in calculations per second of a human brain. And then by 2050 or so, that $1,000 laptop will have the same computing power as all human brains on the planet combined. And that's projected at about 9 billion or so. So what do we do with that kind of computing power in each of our laptops? And what does it enable? Just the same way people 200 years ago would not have imagined some of the things we're doing today, we struggle to imagine what people will do with this kind of innovation, which we'll be able to see because the rate at which it's happening is so fast. Again, that curve is pretty consistent. So Ray has been highly regarded and actually referred to by Bill Gates as one of the best predictors of our time, futurists. So we talked about how that's on an exponential scale. And one of the things that we don't do is think exponentially. As humans, we don't think that way normally. And so we don't understand that a lot of our problems in the world, which are driven by exponential factors or our technologies, when we see something that we think is far away, it's actually much closer if it's growing at an exponential rate. So let's illustrate what that means. If I told you that I was going to take 30 linear steps, so 1 meter, another meter, another meter, you can predict where I'd be across the stage and down the stairs pretty easily. If I told you that I was going to take 30 exponential steps, so 1 meter, 2 meter, 4 meters, 8 meters, and every step would be twice as large as the last step, few people could predict where I would be on that 30th step, which would be about 1 billion meters or 26 times around the Earth. So most people find that surprising. And when you think about the fact that that 30th step that I took was 13 times around the Earth, because it's always double the last one. That's the rate at which our technology is growing. And I'll show you some examples of how that's opening up some opportunities. It also creates severe disruption. So Kodak, very successful old company, in 1996 had a $28 billion market cap, had 140,000 employees. They invented the digital photograph, the digital camera. And they didn't recognize the impact, the exponential impact. And they didn't harness it properly and take advantage of the market opportunity. By 2012, their market cap was less than 10 million. They had 17,000 employees, and they actually filed for bankruptcy. What put the exclamation point on this event was that very same year, Instagram sold for $1 billion, also digital photo-based company, with 13 employees, and it had been created about 18 months earlier. So these are giants that had built decades and decades building themselves, and a couple of kids in a garage or a room, a dorm room, with the exponential rate of these technologies can completely disrupt a space. And that's going to happen in more industries. This is Jack Andraka. This is him speaking at TED. And he speaks at Singularity University sometimes now. He's 15 years old. Jack's uncle died of pancreatic cancer. He was quite upset, and he's a brilliant kid. And so he dove into understanding pancreatic cancer and realized that the issue was catching it early, because it's often caught late. And after spending a lot of time with carbon nanotubes and writing to 200 researchers and getting one of them to let him tinker in the lab, he invented a test to detect pancreatic cancer that is 100% accurate, costs 3 cents. It's about 80, or I can't remember the exact number, significantly more effective than the current method, which had cost significantly more money. So he's 15 years old, and he actually, when he was asked where did he do all his research, where did he learn about pancreatic cancer, where did he learn about carbon nanotubes, he just said Google. He actually learned everything on Google. Got his ideas, got his understanding, and so all of the world's information that's been digitized and put on the web, it's kind of democratized for everyone, allowed this innovation to happen. And he's actually working on his next invention. But again, another story of very big disruption, coming from a place that was just not possible before he would have had access to that. So digitizing information, basically, we've seen what's happened to the music industry, we've seen what's happened to the publishing industry, we've seen how it enabled Jack, but it basically dematerializes when you digitize it. The cost of moving those, of making another copy of a song, it goes to zero. All the costs go to zero. There's zero friction, which is why it's so powerful, and it can grow exponential. The marginal cost, that you can apply data correlations, computation. It becomes an information-based technology, and that is when it really starts to take off, and it gets on that curve. Which means when the costs come down, entrepreneurs from all over the world can access it and can innovate. And that's when we really see change. So some of the fields and technologies that are being impacted in this way right now are artificial intelligence, robotics, biotech, nanotech, various technologies in the field of medicine, neuroscience, energy, and of course continuing is computing. And these are the different areas that we teach at Singularity University and give people a broad understanding of where the curves are. And for some of these technologies, the curves are at different slopes. And we'll look at the difference in some of them. So they're falling in price for the same performance by about 10 times in 1 year. Biotech in particular is doing that because it's built on several technologies. On the left, you see some things that you used to carry around with you, and people still carry around cameras, more for performance. But many things have been dematerialized into your cell phone. So you don't carry a GPS, it's in your phone. You don't carry a compass, it's in your phone. You don't carry maps. Most of us don't use our phone flashlight now, and our camera, and a host of other things. Video recorders, they've kind of just disappeared. They've dematerialized into an app, all right, into a software program. And this is a picture of a sonogram. That's an even smaller sonogram. And most recently, this one is being developed as an app for your phone with one handheld attachment. Eventually, that attachment will get smaller, and the sonogram, as you know, it will become an app. It boils down to small, cheap sensors and computing. And here, when you take apart this phone, you can see the accelerometer, the gyroscope, oscillators, cameras, video recorders, etc. What used to be these big things we carried around. And the miniaturization of computing and sensors is going to enable what's often referred to as the Internet of Things. Historically, our phones or our houses were connected in some way. We could send information back and forth on the telephone or through our computer. That switched as laptops became mobile. And then mobile phones enabled many more devices to be not physically connected. But what's happening is our cars are becoming connected. Our washing machines are sending information. More and more physical things are sending information and are connected to the web. People's pacemakers are sending data back, or other medical devices that are tracking their insulin or whatever. And that's increasing. In fact, it's expected that by 2025, there'll be 50 billion devices connected to the internet, streaming temperature from different parts of your home or different parts of your refrigerator to optimize energy efficiency. Our clothing will be able to measure our heart rate and other physical characteristics to optimize our health, and so they'll be connected to the internet. That opens up a vast world of opportunity for entrepreneurs and startups to create those businesses, those applications that will enable the Internet of Things. So as more and more things are connected to the internet, we all hear about big data. There's an explosion of data, actually. And from the beginning of time, this is a rough estimation done by Eric Schmidt from Google. The estimate is that we've created 5 exabytes of data in the world, or 5 billion gigabytes, since the beginning of time to 2003. But in 2010, we created that same amount of data in 2 days in the world. And in 2013, we're doing it every 10 minutes. In fact, every minute, 72 hours of video is added to YouTube, and that number is increasing. Remember, we have 3 billion people that are coming online that are not online yet. A commercial airliner will generate 1 terabyte of data per day. And that curve is skyrocketing. Police are starting to wear cameras so they can constantly video and monitor. Google Glass is coming out, which will continuously create video. We're recording everything and translating it to zeros and ones. And we are literally awash in data that we're not even processing yet. So 2015, we're expected to create about 8,000 exabytes per year. This, of course, creates an enormous mountain of opportunity for the entrepreneurs that will process and interpret this data to create value in ways that humans never could. As a physician, there's no way I can keep up with all the medical research that's coming out every day around the world, as well as the data coming off of every doctor's. Let's say I have a specialty, it's urology, and there's data being produced by all the urology patients around the world. If that were being aggregated, and that's what we're tracking towards, then it would take kind of AI and other techniques to mine that data, to identify the drivers and what are the real correlations and causations happening underneath. So I did this morning. I just Googled big data startups, and you can get on and kind of see the activity that's happening and the companies that are getting involved. Getting funding, the last one, March 18th, Forbes, big data is attracting a lot of venture capital. There's 2 acquisitions on here, Twitter. You can think about the companies that have tons of data, Facebook, Twitter, others. there's a lot of value to be gleaned in there for entrepreneurs. So we expect to see more startups in that area, and we are. Artificial intelligence is really, really exciting. We're mostly familiar with it when we get on a phone call with a company and we get that terrible customer service experience that's automated, or most recently with Siri. For those of us who are using Siri, it's still a little clunky, but it's the tip of the iceberg for what the actual capabilities of that application are. And if any of you saw IBM's recent supercomputer, Watson, it beat the world champions in a game called Jeopardy! It was offline when it did it, so it couldn't connect to the internet, and it had downloaded millions of pages from the internet. And its ability to search, of course, exceeds humans, but that wasn't really what was impressive about it. What was impressive about it is the game Jeopardy!, if you don't know, is played in a way where the question is asked in reverse. You're provided with the answer. So it would say something like, this city is in northeast Poland and sits near the water, and then it would give you a clue to tell you that it's, not Sopot, but it's another one, Gdańsk. And it's asked sometimes with riddles. So it requires a human level of interpretation of language. It's the natural language processing, which is a huge challenge for computers because it's answering questions in riddles. Anyway, it destroyed the challengers on television, and it was all over the press. And now IBM is working with Sloan Kettering, a leading cancer research center in the US and hospital, to apply Watson to understanding all of the data that's coming out of cancer and being able to make diagnoses and identify some of the issues there. Imagine when entrepreneurs shortly will be able to access artificial intelligence the way we access the cloud for storage. And already startups are using artificial intelligence to do things like adaptive learning for education type startups. Again, think about that 30 steps and think about what happens somewhere in the middle when we get to 26 times around the earth, because the takeaway is that what seems like a not so functioning Siri today very, very quickly is going to shock all of us because it's on that growth curve. And what Ray Kurzweil did for many years was build his startups to where he knew the technology would be. In fact, that's why he started tracking technology, because he started about 15 different companies. And if he knew it would take him 18 months to build the company, he would actually structure it so that it would leverage technology 18 months out. So it's not too early to think about artificial intelligence startups for everyone when it's going to be very accessible and cheap. Let's switch gears and talk about robotics, which is another area that people really don't think about when they think about hackers and entrepreneurs starting off cheap and eating ramen in the valley, but entrepreneurs are moving into robotics. On the left is a DARPA robot. I'll show you a video for that, Boston Dynamics. Now that one's not cheap, but I'll show you one that is. On the top right is called Big Dog, another one that they use that carries materials, and the self-balancing. Right? Balance, which we take for granted, is a very complex task for a machine. Right? You can push those robots and they'll balance themselves and not fall over. So we're getting close to achieving some of those human capabilities. On the bottom right is a bird by Festo, which is a European robotics company, and it flies just like a bird. It uses the same physics. And when it's flying, you can't tell that it's a robot. So if it's flying outside your window and it's recording, you can't tell. Obviously, there's myriad uses and challenges with all of that becoming cheaper. And how cheap is it becoming? Well, in 2008, one of these robotic helicopters used to cost about $700. It was larger. Today, you can buy them on the internet for $20. They fit in the palm of your hand. And that means that people can hack those and do all sorts of things with them. Why did that happen? It happened because the sensors became cheaper and because the electronics and the motor and all of that became miniaturized enough that those light blades could carry it, right? So I have friends out of Singularity University that are creating quadcopters and drones, and we'll see some more later, that can fly over an area that's just experienced some sort of natural disaster. And you can attach all sorts of things to these. Infrared, so you can scan for life in rubble. You can look at traffic. There's a host of things you can do. And we're starting to see people move into the space. This is a DARPA robot. Now, it's traversing the obstacle course, The wires that you see from the top are only providing power, providing balance. It doesn't know the obstacle course ahead of time. It's figuring out as it goes with sensors. So it sees the hole, and in real time, it calculates how to get around it and how to balance itself. There's a whole bunch of those. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the beginning of Terminator, right? We're seeing the beginning of actually someone to walk around the house and fold your laundry and all these other things that you don't want to do. But this is here today. It's not cheap, right? That's very expensive. That's being developed at Boston Dynamics. But again, remember the cost curve, right? 20 years ago, none of us had GPSs, none of us had all of the technology we have today, and it's going to be available soon. It already is on much less sophisticated format. This is Baxter, a manufacturing robot. What's interesting about Baxter? Well, you're used to seeing these huge robots on construction and industrial lines, making cars and things like that. This one is small. It's about the size of a person. It only costs $22,000. And what's most interesting about it is that it doesn't require intensive coding to train the robot. In fact, low-level workers can press record, take the arms of the robot, pick up whatever it needs to pick up, and then move the motions, and then press stop record, and the robot will then identify and pick things up as they come across the assembly line. So a much lower barrier to usability, and now it's getting at the price point where it's about the cost of human labor for manual tasks. So repetitive manual tasks we're going to start to see disappear for manufacturing. There's a whole host of telepresence robots for the home and the office. So people can't be there. The robots, we have a company at SU called Fellow Robots. They'll roam around the office. I was at a conference recently in California, and someone showed up via telepresence robot and was just rolling around talking to people in the conference. It's strange. He was actually talking to Craig Venter, the father of the internet. On the bottom left is an example of a startup that's out in Vegas that was funded by Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos. And that rolls around. You just put your iPhone in it. It's a very cheap telepresence robot. And so we already have entrepreneurs moving into the space. Tony Hsieh is interested in investing more in it. We're starting to see interest from the Valley as the costs come down to the point where two kids in their garage can tinker something together and make something. And that explosion is coming. Let's talk about robotic cars. In Poland, there's about 37,000 traffic accidents, 4,200 deaths, at a cost of about $6.5 billion. In the US, we have about 32,000 deaths per year in traffic accidents. Well, why? We only have visual sensors in our eyes, so we can't see behind us. We're kind of terrible drivers. We text, we eat, we talk, we fall asleep. We're horrible drivers. This is Google's self-driving car. Most of you probably know this already. There's no one driving this car. It's using that sensor at the top to detect stop signs, children, people in the street. It knows the rules of the road. This car's, there's a fleet of them now. There's 12. They bring one to Singularity University so the students can see it. It's driven over 300,000 miles in all sorts of cities in the US. And now self-driving cars are legal in Nevada, California, and Florida. It is a saving grace for blind people who can't get themselves around. But it also means that the billions and billions of hours that we spend doing this all of our lives, which is completely unnecessary, can go away. Drunk driving, all of the other things that are issues. So this today is expensive. That LiDAR system cost about $75,000. It's accurate to about a centimeter, and it tracks 1.3 million points per second. But remember our exponential curve on cost and performance, right? When that's $300 and you can attach it to some of those telepresence robots, which have rudimentary sensors today, then all of a sudden these startups that young hackers are working on will have capability of self-awareness, right? And that's going to be accessible to people in a few years. Festo, I mentioned before with their bird robot, they just released a new dragonfly robot, which you control from your iPhone. And we have one at SU that you can control with your iPhone as well. It's not this one just came out. And the flight capability on this has more combinations than a helicopter, a plane, and a glider combined. And I'm going to show you a video of it in action. Incredibly exciting as there's hummingbird robots now. There's robots that can jump on buildings. If you just Google Boston Dynamics, you'll see a whole host of robots. And we're going to see them used more and more. In terms of aerial robots, there was a group of students at Singularity University. One of the things we do is, the focus of SU is to teach people these technologies and then challenge them to address some of the world's biggest problems, what we call the global grand challenges: food, water, energy, security, poverty, healthcare, education, etc. And this team was looking at poverty, and they were trying to get some technologies out into undeveloped areas, and they realized that the lack of infrastructure or roads was a problem. And they thought, after seeing one of our courses, taking one of our classes on drones and having people come in and demonstrate them, and they recognized the curve of how much distance a drone could go, a quadcopter, and what it can carry, and how that performance was increasing. And they recognized today it can carry medicine between villages, and that they could create artificial intelligence base stations that would power these quadcopters, and so that you could put something in the basket, send it to a village, it would base itself somewhere, and effectively create a mesh network in an area that didn't have good infrastructure, and leapfrog the lack of infrastructure the same way mobile phones leapfrog the lack of landline phone infrastructure in some of these places. So that company is called Matternet, and they're presenting at TED as well. We're very excited about them. Brain-computer interface is another really exciting area. All of the ones you see here are non-invasive, so you just put on the headband or the device, and it can detect your emotions. It can actually, larger machines can detect words. So if you want to spell out the word house, very large machines will detect the word and put it on the screen. But now you can do things like change the lighting in your house based on your mood, play certain music, etc. And there's a few startups that are starting to develop applications in this area. This particular video was an invasive one, because now we can connect mechanical electronic signals with human electronic signals. That's wired into her brain, and she's controlling that arm just by willing it to move. And your brain is interesting, because if you want the arm to come closer and it's going the wrong way, your brain will just send a different signal. Unfortunately, the video is cut off, but she actually has the arm turn and she drinks. She's a quadriplegic, she can't move any part of her body, and she just got herself a drink with that robotic arm. This one's interesting. This came out in April, and it's a Harvard researcher wearing a headband. The rat on the table is also wearing a headband. This is completely non-invasive. They're both just wearing headbands. The rat's unconscious, and he was trying to get the rat's tail to move. In case you didn't see that, let's do it again. Watch the rat's tail. Amazing. So you can all decide what startups you want to create out of that one. Augmented reality, if you're not familiar with Google Glass, they've actually released it out to a limited number of developers around the world who can apply for a Google Glass so they can start building applications on it. And this will, sense the world around you as you're walking around, and a doctor can look at you and take readings and learn as it goes. You can look at food and information may pop up. I can download your online profile while I'm talking to you and get your name and things like that. So this is going to open up a whole new world of opportunity for developers to build applications there. But again, think back to the amount of data that it's going to create And remember that this Google Glass, this first iteration, is going to shrink down. It's going to almost disappear to the point where it might be as small as an earpiece or something like that. Positioning it as a pin may be the difficult part, right? Putting it somewhere, because it's going to get so small. 3D printing is an incredibly exciting area. I assume everyone's here heard of it. If not, 3D printing basically does the same thing regular printers do, except it does it in 3 dimensions. So it actually can print a physical good, like this, or my cell phone case, or my shoes, or this ring was printed in metal. And the way it's printed in metal is you take small particles, you put them next to each other, and then you fuse them together. So what does that mean? That means that you can type something in, and something will get physically created in your home. Sounds familiar. It's like sending somebody a music file. You send them a 3D AutoCAD file of a physical object, and if you have the printer, you can print it at home as you need it. So the ramifications and the implications here for manufacturing are enormous. Manufacturing costs are made up of the design itself and the brand, the raw materials, the complexity, because how complex it is today impacts how much it costs to produce, and then finally, the transportation costs and other inefficiencies and tariffs. Well, once this is information enabled and it becomes a computer file, then a lot of those costs go away. Specifically, with 3D printing, complexity is free. In fact, we can 3D print things that are more complex, and so complex that we cannot produce them with traditional manufacturing, any other manufacturing method today. And some of the places where you see 3D printing come up first are with Invisalign or tooth replacements. Actually, many airplane parts are 3D printed, people don't realize. But now it's getting to the point where you can buy an $1,100 3D printer and start to print things in your home. There's open, basically, libraries where people submit their designs. They create any design for something 3D printed. You can go down there and download something. And eventually, they'll get cheap enough where we have them, which means that we all can become manufacturers, right? We all can prototype and create something to the point where it gets enough demand that we can create a larger system. These are all different devices that are 3D printed. The person on the top right, if you are missing any limbs, you can make yourself taller. On the bottom left, that prosthesis there was actually made by scanning the other leg and then 3D printing one that was the mirror so that your prosthesis is more comfortable, you have the right fit, and you can also personalize it with the design that you're looking for. Entire motorcycles have been 3D printed. And all sorts of materials are being used, rubber, steel, etc. There's already sites. This is one called Shapeways, where you can go on and you can create your own design, and people can order it. It'll get 3D printed and sent to them, and you can make money doing that. There's entrepreneurs who are started off in 3D printing, and they've just become designers, right? And eventually, now, for example, when you go to Shapeways, you can either buy the file if you have your own 3D printer, or you can order it, and they'll 3D print it and send it to you. Soon, everyone will just print at home from whatever file is online. So we're going to see many more entrepreneurs there. We're also going to see large economic impacts from the disruption to traditional manufacturing. 3D printing is also capable for biological materials. There's a company called Organovo that takes stem cells, derives certain types of cells, maybe it's a bladder cell, and realize when you put them next to each other, they will naturally fuse. Put them in a box the same temperature as the human body, exercise them, and it can create small organs. It's already implanted a trachea in someone and created some other very small organs. That same company's technical team, that's a public company now, Organova, and they make those tissues for testing for pharmaceuticals. But they've spun out and created a new company called Modern Meadow, which is a Singularity University company as well, that can take a cow cell, a muscle cell, and then multiply it so that there's sheets and sheets of muscle from one cell and make enough leather to clothe the world and actually create edible burgers, right? Without the pollution, the toxins, eating all the grass, producing all the methane, raising, slaughtering, and transporting animals. Now, some people go, oh my God, I could never eat lab-grown meat, right? But I actually think in the future it will flip when people look at what goes into the food supply and knowing that you can control what's in the food supply. And when you look at the need to feed the planet and what's going to happen to the price of meat, modern meadow has the potential to dramatically create significant value for the world's population, not to mention, of course, the benefit of animals. A lot of these companies are on the edge of controversy. Let's switch to biotech for a second. I mentioned that it was decreasing in price performance faster than Moore's Law. The blue line is Moore's Law, which is about reducing in cost every 18 months, as I mentioned. The black line is biotech, which is built on several other technologies, and it's about 5x that, so 10 times. So the cost of sequencing your DNA, and then also the cost of synthesizing, right? So writing and putting together DNA for genetic engineering or synthetic biology is decreasing to the point where we will all be able to get our DNA sequenced very cheaply, very soon, and doctors will do it so to understand how different medications will affect you. I carry some of my DNA from 23andMe. I have a mobile app for it. I know different things about myself, for example, a particular drug I'm sensitive to genetically, et cetera. And pretty soon that'll just happen down the road at your drugstore. So this is Craig Venter, who's really a luminary in the field and created the first synthetic life form, 1.1 million base pairs. Did it in a very rudimentary way, pasting together the nucleic acids, GTAC, the same way code is put together. He did it inside of a cell membrane, but again, this is really just the beginning. And what we're already starting to see, young people move into this field. In fact, a lot of the people who lived through the tech revolution are looking at this now and saying, if I were starting over today and I were starting my career, this is where I would go. And there's people creating biotech labs in their homes, in their garages. Sound familiar? Because the equipment's cheap enough now. And the two logos on the right are actually community biotech labs. One's in New York, GenSpace, and the other one, BioCurious, is very close to us in Silicon Valley. And you can join like a gym, a health club, $100 a month. You can go in and use all the equipment. You have a full biotech lab. So anybody for the price of a gym membership can be a bioengineer. We're starting to see people move into the field at an increasing rate. This is iGEM competition, which stands for International Genetically Engineered Machines. It started at MIT, and now it's grown to thousands of schools around the world that compete to create an organism in 3 months. I think last year's winner took a yeast that could make kerosene, and also took another bacteria or yeast that was able to digest gluten 800 times more effectively than the current leading drug on the market. And so it's exploding, and people are moving into the field. If you look at biology, it's really just like computers. Instead of zeros and ones, you have the 4 nucleic acids. There's a code compiler to write that easy. Then you run it in software, and then you run it on a computer, the hardware. Well, our bodies run our DNA code in chromosomes, and then on the hardware is the cell. And what one company realized is that they were pasting in the nucleic acids, and what was missing was a compiler, which nobody actually types zeros and ones when they write code. They drag and drop sections of code. So they created a genome compiler, where you can drag and drop huge chunks of DNA and then paste them together. So if you want the part of a jellyfish that glows in the dark, you can drag that into something else. And then you hit send, and it goes to a company called DNA 2.0 in Silicon Valley, and they will actually synthesize your DNA and send it to you in a test tube for 45 cents a base pair, which is incredibly expensive still. If you look at Craig Venter's 1.1 million base pairs, that would have cost $500,000. I think the polio virus is 3 million base pairs. But remember our exponential curve about the reduction of cost. And remember when I said that the reduction of these costs in this field is happening at 5 times the rate of regular computing. And that's why you don't even need a lab anymore. You just send it off to DNA 2.0. And as soon as those costs come down, basically everyone with a computer can be a bioengineer. Very scary and very promising at the same time, like many of our technologies. I think we can all think of disaster scenarios. If you want a glow-in-the-dark cat, this cat actually exists. This one was made by splicing in, again, some chromosomes for glow-in-the-dark that you see in bugs or in jellyfish. And this one's tracking cancer treatments, and they can see where it lights up. But last week, there was big controversy in the New York Times and on Kickstarter, because the first ever synthetic biology company on Kickstarter, and one of those gentlemen in that photo is a graduate of Singularity University, they did a Kickstarter for glowing plants. So that you could put, instead of a street light and waste electricity at night, they would automatically glow. Of course, what they were doing was ask people who contribute to the Kickstarter can get the glow-in-the-dark seeds as they engineer them. And of course, they're at the forefront of controversy. Actually, the FDA and other government agencies are fine with what they're doing because they looked at the type of it. But like any other technological change, it comes with anxiety. One of the things that's really exciting about this area, and I saved it for the end, is imagine when someone gets cancer or you get cancer, and actually every tumor has its own DNA, and you can sequence that for 10 cents. It'll be cheaper to sequence your DNA than to flush the toilet in the next 5 to 10 years. And you identify that, and you put it up on the web, the DNA of your tumor, and you open it up to volunteer hackers all over the world to create a hack for it and send it to you and crowdsource. And we've already seen the power of crowdsourcing, right? So that a Jack Andraka out there somewhere in the world can find your cure. So huge potential and huge risk. To date, humanity has been able to benefit from technology in a way that far exceeds the risks that are taken as more of us get individual power, right? Not just all the things our phone can do, but this kind of capability. A little bit about SU before I finish. We were founded in 2008 by Ray Kurzweil, the futurist I mentioned before, and Peter Diamandis, a great entrepreneur who founded X Prize and International Space University and a bunch of other organizations. They wanted to create a place where these conversations could happen. And we were founded by Google, ePlanet Ventures, Cisco, Genentech, NASA, and a bunch of others inside the NASA Research Park. Basically, what we do is we take the type of exponential thinking that I've been talking about, train the most talented people we can find from around the world, and we have people from over 35 countries in our 80-person courses over the summer, 10 weeks, and then we have our executive programs, and then we focus them on the world's biggest challenges and ask them to create a product, service, or company that will impact 1 billion people or more in 10 years. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and empower leaders to utilize those technologies to address humanity's grand challenges. And we have something called the Global Impact Competition, where in 20 cities around the world, we run a contest that's sponsored by local corporates. Anyone can enter and submit an idea that will impact your region or city that will impact 1 million people. The winner of that contest gets one of our 80 seats at Singularity University over the summer for our 10-week program. And this year, in the Eastern European competition, we had 2 winners. Some cities will send 2. And one was from Budapest, and the other is a woman from Warsaw who's going to be joining us this summer. So we're excited about that. And you can find more information at singularityU.org on the technologies that I've been talking about, as well as our programs. So thank you, and I have time for questions.